security, data center, and networking. This is IT in the Bay.
All right, we are back, and I'm here with my man, Michael, and we're just going to chat about some things. I think we could talk about, you've been doing some wireless assessments, and just, thanks for being here.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So, I mean, tell me a little bit about how you got into IT. Like, so what's your backstory? What are some of the things that you did? What was the worst IT job? You know, give me the background, how you got into IT.
Oh, well, I kind of fell into it. I had a interest in technology when I was young and built my own little PCs and enjoyed making web pages, basic stuff. And I ended up getting a job at a Cisco VAR and doing accounting and accounts receivable, accounts payable.
Wow. So you started in accounting.
Yeah, exactly. I really didn't have any formal knowledge about the modern networks, and it was just an interesting topic. So after about a year, I got my CCNA and started talking with the engineers a little bit more, and a spot opened up, and made my way onto that team in entry level capacity, and that was the beginning.
Yeah. I feel like everyone finds their way into IT in one way or another. That's interesting. So accounting, and then Joe, he actually was in accounting and then moved to sales. So it's like, it's an interesting, I guess you get to see all aspects of the business from accounting perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Was well familiar with Cisco year end, even in that capacity, and the scramble for it, and got really familiar with parts and how Cisco sort of orders that stuff. So it was a good introduction. That's
interesting. So if you started at a VAR, did you even realize what you were kind of stepping into from a VAR perspective, or you just said, "Hey, I'm in accounting, and this is it"?
It was. I had no idea what I was getting into or what they did, other than my job and what I was focused on day to day at the time. Yeah. So I was cutting purchase orders and purchasing the equipment. I ended up getting into purchasing. So it was more on the administrative side, the back end for about 2 years, 2 to 3 years before I actually made my way over to the engineering side. So
you were familiar with the parts, but not necessarily what they did. So you saw CGR or whatever it was, ISR 4331. You saw the models, but
yeah, exactly. And we had to. So back then they didn't really have the integration they do today with the marketplace, and we would have to place the orders manually online, and so that means building all the line cards and making sure you pick the right power supply is sort of how it was spec'd initially. And I had no idea what those parts did, or just it was just let's hope the pre-sales engineer picked the parts correctly. And when I built the router in the command line, in the marketplace tool that they had at the time, that it was very foreign, and it was a lot of stuff, and I didn't understand how anyone could really understand it, what exactly all of this did. But I've since learned a few things and learned that side.
Well, you've come a long way then. I mean, like from when you think about getting a bomb and all the things that could go wrong or like be question marks, and I would imagine some points you would have like a order come in, and then you'd go into the tool, and then the option maybe wouldn't be available. Would you just guess or solve? How would you do?
That's a good question. Yeah, we ran into that. I ran into that quite a bit. Yeah. My first step would be to follow up with the original engineer, the pre-sales engineer who put the bomb together.
Yeah.
And more often than not, they would be able to answer it, but sometimes they didn't really know the right answer either.
Yeah.
And so I had to do a little bit of digging and work with them on that as well to identify like if it's a power cable or some obscure cable at that time. So that was a good introduction into starting to understand what each component did, and but we did run into that quite a bit.
Okay, awesome. And then after that, you got your CCNA, and then you transitioned into deployment support. What did you do after that?
Yeah, actually, I've been everywhere.
Awesome.
After I got my NA, I actually transitioned into the pre-sales team, and I was on pre-sales engineering for quite a while. Actually, I was an inside pre-sales engineer, and that was also a really good introduction from a different angle, really, as far as the networking side. I mean, it was more on the sales side, obviously, but you still had to start understanding the functionality of the equipment and how it all went together. And eventually I was more or less doing the responsibilities of a regular pre-sales engineer in terms
Yeah.
of like the project sizes and scopes. At some point, I realized that in order for me to be a really efficient and effective pre-sales engineer, I really had to get my hands on the equipment and get into it and into the trenches, as I like to say.
Yeah.
So that's where I asked if I could be transferred into the outside sales or outside engineering
Deployment.
team, the deployment side,
Yeah.
and really just run with projects on my own. And that wish was granted. So it started off again on the bottom rungs. Lots of rack and stack, AP installs, just all the physical aspects of it, staging, configuring anything, which is it's experience. You just you have to get, and it was invaluable for sure. So
One of the things I like hearing from people that have been in deployment, I mean, it sounds like you did some pre-sales and then you moved to deployment, which is kind of a different world because now you're in front of the customer when it doesn't work or if something's not working. So could you have any story or any like thing that stands out? Like you're on site and XYZ, like anything that stands out as like one of those times that you're like, I'll never forget this.
Yeah, I mean, there's been plenty of interesting stories that have developed. I was fortunate enough to have some good mentors on the delivery side. So when I did make my way to that team and found myself over my head or just ramping up my knowledge, it was still some gaps. So I was always able to go to the next level up, and so to speak, and kind of get sanity checks on what I'm looking at. I wish I could like give you a specific example or an anecdote, but it's been a long sort of career since then, and there's just no shortage of surprises and those types of experiences.
I think it's like run and maintain. I mean, it's like this is like par for the when you get into deployment or anything with IT, it's like par for the course for there to be some type of issue or some type of challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I still run into that day to day too, and there's still something that I've never seen before kind of pop up, and it's a challenge, but that's part of the fun is being able to untangle whatever issue you run across and logically approach it and try to break it down into manageable pieces and then work through the problem.
Yeah, I mean, that's so important, being able to take a complex problem and break it down into the simplest things, it's not an easy skill. I mean, like it makes it's almost essential when you're doing deployment or any kind of troubleshooting.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like there's some validity to the OSI model and approaching it from a sort of a thought out approach from the different layers, going through the different layers in order. And it really makes sense after the fact. It seems that at the time when you're reading about these OSI levels and layers, you're like, well, how is this going to be practical? Do I have to just memorize this stuff for no reason? But when it actually comes to troubleshooting, it makes sense to work your way up from the bottom up or top down or whatever the case may be. Because
if you follow that, you're going to touch everything. And so if you go, hey, physical, data link, whatever all the way up, you're starting to touch every single aspect of the issue.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really what separates like a good engineer from a great engineer is one who really can adhere to that, and instead of just kind of jump around what they think might be the best way to kind of resolve the issue. But in the long run, they'll end up having to go back through each layer and work their way through it. So I think having that discipline of starting in a layer one or whichever layer you want to start on and working your way through it, that's really what separates the good from the great.
Yeah, no, I think I was more of a gunslinger. I just like point and shoot, man. I wish I had more of that discipline, but I think I just would go, oh, that's the issue, and then fire miss. Oh, fire miss.
Well, some people are naturals, and I'm sure you are as well.
Yeah, no. It's so after that, after you did deployment, did you do anything different? Did you go into a different group, or did you stay there for a while? What was that like?
That's sort of been where I've been at, and sort of got my comfort area defined, and sort of stuck there, and which was okay at the time, but in retrospect, I'm seeing how I should have kept my knowledge diversified, I guess, across the board, and it's Yeah, I find now, especially after working here, that there's a lot of other areas that all relate to one another, and having a broader um, having a broader sense of how they all interoperate. It's revealing to me that there's a couple of areas that I may have had some other team address, where now I'm taking it upon myself to get more familiar with that. So it's all sort of rooted in the same discipline, or in the same category, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, well, so many things, like if you're talking about voice, voice touches network, or even data center with storage, iSCSI, that touches network. And having that routing and switching base, which you have, is so critical. But then when you get into firewalls, security, VPN, all these other overlays, technologies, they're all rooted in that core functionality, which is great that you have. But I think it is interesting to see that, because it sounds like you were focused on in that role as one particular technology, and if it was another piece of the technology, it was a different engineer or a different team. Is
that's exactly right? Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm seeing the value in now being a little bit more broad with what I'm comfortable, or what I'm focused on, or say the best way to put it, I guess, would be makes my job easier to be more familiar with a couple of other areas, especially security. They seem to be like one and the same now. It used to be route switch, security. It's really you got to be comfortable with both, and it just makes the job go by much smoother and faster when you really are able to not have to wait for like a security engineer to do something minor or anything really.
Yeah.
So I feel like the two are joined at the hip, and I've just been a better engineer once I embraced that and started to pick up my focus on security as well, and feel like I'm rounding out on that area as well, and got the route switch and security sort of working together.
Yeah.
So
I think that in you don't hear much about it in infrastructure when they talk about your route switch. I know some security, I know some collab. They don't really talk about it in the same terms that they do around development, or like software developers. And so I've heard this comment of like full stack developers, or this, that's the idea, full stack developer. They don't really talk about a full stack engineer, network engineer. And so I think what you're kind of talking about is if you said, hey, I'm the SQL guy or the database guy in the old development world, now they need to be the dev guy. They need to understand the platform. They need to understand Docker. They need to understand some app development and some agile methodology. All of that starts to make them a full stack developer. But on the networking side, it's kind of the same concept. You can't be, hey, I'm a switch guy or I'm a router guy. You got to be a router, a switch guy, a voice guy, a video guy, a QoS guy, a security guy, a VPN guy. Mm-hmm. So all those things. I think what you're saying is so true, and that's great. It's great to hear.
Yeah, I think even Cisco's acknowledging that now, especially with the way they're restructuring their training.
Yeah,
they really are pushing people to be a little bit more diverse with their knowledge, and not necessarily just focus on a specific silo or technological vertical, or a certain area. It says now they are expecting people to have a little bit of knowledge in everything. That's relevant to that particular discipline.
Well, everything is integrating now. So I think, with cloud and infrastructure as a service and software as a service and all those things, they've got to talk to each other in some way. And so I think having an understanding of all that is key. Well, cool. Well, I kind of want to hear about, so you recently have been doing some wireless assessments, and what are some of the things that you did or didn't know going into it that you kind of have learned along the way, or stuff that surprised you? I don't know, anything that comes to mind that you're like, hey, I went into this thinking one thing and now it's different, or
actually, wireless is a fun area to start really getting more exposure to. I've got some experience with it in the past, and now I've had this opportunity to really dive in there with some pretty elaborate tools that we've acquired. The Echo House Site Survey tool, and really getting familiar with the data that it's able to to generate based on these passive surveys that we do on site. I would say the biggest surprise, at least in the wireless space, and this may not come as a shock to some people, but wireless is a single. It's similar to like a hub where only one active person can be speaking to avoid collisions.
Yeah.
So I apologize for getting the word.
No, it's
the wording for this.
I think I can't even think of the word. What you're talking about is
carrier sense.
like CSMA CD. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
It's similar to that, or collision domains having. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah,
or,
that's exactly.
Or
it.
just yeah.
Okay, I'll start over on
Sure.
and respond to your initial question. So with wireless, I'm finding one of the most interesting aspects is that it's considered like a single collision domain. So it's really just one person or one device speaking at a time. So if you think about it, a single access point covering an office with dozens of users connecting to it, every bit of traffic that's moving between a client and an access point is having to wait its turn to broadcast and use that single cable in the sky, if it were, as it were. So that whole mechanism, as far as how the AP and how clients sort of coordinate and dance around each other on how they can utilize that media is pretty interesting, and understanding that really helps shed some light on some of the issues that could be present in a wireless space with regard to utilization percentages and whatnot. So and why it makes sense sometimes to disable some of the lower data rates to that older protocols used. It's that was a sort of an aha moment for me as far as understanding what's happening communication wise between these two points, and how is it handled with like a huge location like a stadium where all these devices are competing to talk, and that goes for the AP responding back to the clients as well. So they have to sort of slip in, their communications, and it's impressive, I think, for it to actually even work.
It works. Yeah. I mean, one of the things I know that there's MIMO and all those different technologies, and we don't have to get into the technical details of them, but some of those are increasing bandwidth because they're using more antennas and non-overlapping channels and all that stuff. And it is interesting to think about stadiums, because I think sometimes the cell size or the AP range, the power's turned down, right? And so that you have one AP covering less distance, so you're not competing for so many devices in an area, I guess.
Yeah, there's really quite a bit that has to go into the planning and the thought process on how to accomplish a high density environment like that.
Yeah.
It's challenging enough for smaller spaces sometimes, especially if there's a lot of interference or other businesses nearby. But it's hard to even imagine how to even approach a stadium to give people that quality experience.
Yeah. And so when you're doing some of these surveys, and what's your thoughts on predictive surveys versus the actual wireless survey where you're walking around with the tool and holding your hand in the air and boop boop boop, that kind of deal? Like, what's your thought on the predictive versus the walking through the actual building?
Well, there's nothing better than the actual to give you that concrete data that you need. But I think there's a lot of value in predictive surveys as well. It's obviously nothing that we can guarantee in terms of the signal coverage, but from my experience, I've found them to be fairly accurate after APs have been deployed, and often they sort of match up with the predictive that was done. Yeah. It's better than really just trying to guess.
It's surprising how accurate the predictive is.
Yeah, and there's variables that could throw off the accuracy of that, but for most spaces and most offices that just have drywall and normal building materials and a normal type of floor plan, it works out really well.
Yeah. And so you would say predictive is probably pretty good to use for really any net new greenfield, right? To give you an idea, rough and tough, of where to put the APs.
Yeah. I think it's always a good practice when possible to try to get a predictive done. Just to go along with all the other planning.
Yeah.
And kind of show where some of these estimates may have came from and our estimated coverage after the site would go live.
Yeah.
The best case is doing a predictive, then deploying the hardware, and then if possible doing a passive survey on site to kind of measure up against the predictive and see just how accurate it was, or if there are any gaps that weren't expected. The two together would really give you the 100% type of information that you're looking for, and just overview.
Now, one of the things that like rogue APs or channel overlap, have you seen anything with that in that area that you found interesting, or as you're doing some of these assessments that you were surprised about?
Actually, yes. It's not uncommon for access points to override each other. So in the 2.4 gigahertz space, that only has 3 usable channels that do not overlap with one another, and there are quite a few more in the 5 gigahertz range. But the issues that we see most commonly are related to 2.4 radios, and because of the limitation with the number of non-overlapping channels, it's even within an organization, if you got more than 3 APs, you're gonna start
hit it.
Yeah. So,
and 2.4 goes further, right? Too. So
it does. Yeah. It has it's a lower frequency, so it's able to go through barriers better, and it also just has in general a larger coverage area for the cell.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes when we've gone into organizations where they're running 2.4 and 5 gigahertz, they'll have intermittent performance issues because clients, for whatever reason, are picking 2.4. And I don't know if that's because of the RSSI strength on it overrides the 5 gigahertz, or I don't know if you know off the top, or or it could be.
It's partially OS related as far as preference on one radio or over one radio over the other within the network interface card, wireless NIC on that device. So it is possible to have some policies on some Windows machines, and I imagine Macs as well, to have a preference, a priority. Yeah. There's also some mechanisms built into like the wireless LAN controller, the Cisco wireless LAN controller. We can do some band steering. There's some pros and cons to using that feature. It could cause some delays during roaming if it is enabled. So it's really like a trade-off. Like, how bad is it? Do we need to really steer people toward it? And I guess it's a pretty rudimentary mechanism on the wireless LAN controller side. It's basically someone's trying to connect at 2.4, and the WLC will deny them twice, and in hopes that the end client will then move on to its next radio and try to connect with that method.
Got it.
So with that,
I've never heard of that feature. That's cool. And so that's like the trade-off of, instead of disabling 2.4 altogether, do that. So it just it still would allow 2.4 clients to connect, but really kind of nudge them to 5 gigahertz.
Exactly, yeah. And that's also why there may be some roaming issues, because when they move from one AP to the next, they're trying to reconnect at 2.4, it's denying them, then allowing them. So there could be some issues with that, with roaming. So
it's not good for fast roaming if you had like maybe voice you wanted to support on mobile devices or laptops.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, and then one of the things when you get an assessment done and it gives you these big reports, these long reports of all this information, what's the information you would look at like initially to kind of tell you good, bad? Is it RSSI, signal to noise ratio? I mean, what would you look at? What would you consider as like one of the first places to look, I guess?
Yeah. So the first and the most popular is the coverage map, just to give you a general idea of if there's any gaps in your coverage. So that's usually the most popular. It shows the RSSI strength overlaid on map, and we'll show you sort of what your RSSI values are, as if they fall within thresholds that you set. And that's the most useful as far as to see, do I have wireless coverage here? Yep. Followed up with interference graphs and maps. And that gets broken down into checking to see if there's a narrow signal to noise ratio. You want it to be have a wider margin, so a larger signal to noise ratio. you want to analyze the co-channel interference. So how many other APs are on channel 1, 6, or 11?
Right.
How strong are they? Are they nearby? And then there's other interference maps and graphs as well that just show if there's any other potential interference from non-wireless devices. In some cases, cordless phones or microwaves could interfere with some of those bands with 2.4 for the most part.
Yeah. Have you ever seen those old school? I don't know if they're old school, but the wireless cameras, not IP-based wireless cameras, but the ones with like the RCAs on one side. Those run, I think, at 2.4 too. Like this I don't know if they're 5 gigahertz. I don't know, but those video ones take up a lot of. They make a lot of noise. I don't know if you've ran into that.
Yeah, haven't at most of these offices we haven't seen that type of interference. But you're right. I mean, there are devices that use that space 2.4. There are some nowadays cordless phones that are in the 2.4 space as well. There are like nanny cams. Like
yeah, that's what I was thinking. The kid cam or whatever it is, like the baby cam.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And even Bluetooth to a degree, but it's such a low power output. It's usually not interfering too much. Most of the interference that we see are just from other APs within 2.4 space specifically. Usually 5 gigahertz is pretty wide open. There's quite a few channels there. So, yeah, those are
mostly 2.4. Yeah. Well, cool. I definitely have more questions about BLE and like some of that, but I think we're getting flashed for time. But as one of the things that we do when we exit IT in the Bay, we say IT in the Bay at the same time on 3, because last time I didn't count. I don't know how to count. So like what we do is we'll go IT in the Bay at the same time on 3. So are you ready?
I'm ready.
Have you heard this before or no?
No, I don't recall this part.
Okay. So on 3, we'll say IT in the Bay. We kind of sing it. It's kind of a fun thing.
All right, I'll do my best.
Yeah, okay. We don't have to have like perfect voice, but we do. All right, here we go. 1, 2, 3. IT in the Bay. Cool. All right. Well, hey, thanks, Michael, for being here. If you want to check out some of the blogs Michael's done, he's done some on a Raspberry Pi console server, which was pretty cool. Check it out at lookingpoint.com. Just go to the blog section. Thanks for being here. Peace out.